So, today I want to talk about President Biden's executive order on reforming our incarceration system. Within the limited power of the executive branch to enact change, this actually represents a huge shift in policy and might actually make a tangible difference in the near future for a number of prisoners. And so, given that this seems to be a net positive where Biden has actually kept a campaign promise and is moving forward on policy rather quickly, I thought it would be worth taking a look at it and the systems behind it. So, I want to actually read the executive order. It's not very long. I'll skip over the parts that are, kind of monotonous and in every executive order. And I want to talk about its limitations, and then I want to talk about why it's important by examining three specific questions. With that said, let's read the executive order. So, you have the executive order on reforming our incarceration system to eliminate the use of privately operated criminal detention facilities. Section 1 Policy. More than 2 million people are currently incarcerated in the United States, including a disproportionate number of people of color. There is a broad consensus that our current system of mass incarceration imposes significant costs and hardships on our society and communities and does not make us safer. To decrease incarceration levels, we must reduce profit based incentives to incarcerate by phasing out federal government's reliance on privately operated criminal detention facilities. We must ensure that our nation's incarceration and correctional systems are prioritizing rehabilitation and redemption. Incarcerated individuals should be given a fair chance to fully reintegrate into their communities, including by participating in programming tailored to earning a good living, securing affordable housing, and participating in our democracy as our fellow citizens. However, privately operated criminal detention facilities consistently underperform federal facilities with respect to correctional services, programs, and resources. We should ensure that time in prison prepares individuals for the next chapter of their lives. The federal government also has a responsibility to ensure the safe and humane treatment of those in the federal criminal justice system. However, as the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General found in 2016, privately operated criminal detention facilities do not maintain the same level of safety and security for people in the federal criminal justice system or for correctional staff. We have a duty to provide these individuals with safe working and living conditions. Section 2 Contracts with privately operated criminal detention facilities. The Attorney General shall not renew Department of Justice contracts with privately operated criminal detention facilities as consistent with applicable law. So, quickly getting it out of the way, what are the limits to this? Well, first and foremost, this is not going to solve systemic racism. This is not going to solve capitalism. This isn't going to fix the grand problems of our society. It's an action done by the president in, a limited capacity. So when he speaks to this policy shift, what it really is a very strong lip service that hopefully will, push legislation in the future. One can hope, but I'm not really holding my breath on that. Where I think it is important to talk about is the fact that the government is acknowledging that there is a problem, not just with prisons in general, but with people of color being disproportionately affected by this. The Obama administration actually did talk about a lot of this stuff near the end and enacted a policy to shut down prisons then, but the Trump administration overturned it. So a return to that position is actually really beneficial and good to see. This is one of the few policies that I'm just going to outright give both Obama and Biden credit for. So within this, they do talk about the fact that people need to reintegrate into their communities and all this other stuff, and it speaks to a very capitalist understanding of the way the system is meant to function. And that's not a surprise. That doesn't surprise anyone here. And I don't think, again, this is going to address the issues of capitalism and how it's tied to white supremacy and fix everything across the board. Another limitation is that this is only a executive order. The document only works on federal prisons under this private, contract. So this doesn't speak to ICE facilities that are under a completely different jurisdiction. This doesn't speak to private state institutions and prisons. It doesn't speak to the general prison problem as a whole and public prisons as well, because they have their own issues. But the private prisons, especially the federal ones, are really terrible. And the fact that Biden, with a single pen stroke, can make a change like this that in the very near future will allow for a lot of people to get into at least better facilities, I think is something to consider and take into account. What this actually does do on the ground is it deals with these specific 12 facilities that are listed on the screen. And these 12 facilities represent a prison population of nearly 27,000 prisoners as of 2017 numbers, so somewhere between 27 and 28,000. And that's out of a total of 121,000 in the total prison system that are in private institutions. So, given that, that is actually a significant representation of the number of people in private prisons. And I think it will be a bonus to, see this kind of policy enacted. So within those limitations and taking all that into account, what are the questions we should be asking when looking at this? Well, one, what does it actually do? Well, I just addressed it. It shuts down those 12 specific prisons. It will also make a tangible difference in terms of conditions, which I will go over shortly. It's also a policy shift away from the prison pipeline, which is significant because this policy and anything to do with prisons, unfortunately, disproportionately is talking about people of color because of systems like this being in place. So when we talk about the why is this important? I have to explain to you how federal prisons work when they are privatized and how prisons in general that are privatized work. So basically, a state or the federal government or whatever facility ends up deciding and realizing that it costs a certain amount of money to host a prisoner in a cell. Say, for example, it's $200. So they put a contract out, a bidding for a private company to come in, and that private company then says, well, I can do it for $100. And then I can charge the government $150, and it becomes a for-profit model. On the surface, that sounds wonderful to the government. It says, well, this company can take it over and we'll save $50 a prisoner. How it usually manifests, as in all cases when you privatize things that are supposed to be public services, like, I don't know, water supplies or healthcare or housing or anything like a prison or even something like internet access. The monopolistic or oligopolic, companies will end up creating an institution that incentivizes for-profitness through lobbying. And that's exactly what we have seen. As a matter of fact, the two largest for-profit prison companies in the United States, GEO and Corrections Corporation of America, and their associates, have funneled more than $10 million to candidates since 1989 and have spent nearly $25 million on lobbying efforts. Meanwhile, these private companies have seen revenue and market shares soar. And so within this framework, it saves money, but the reason that they're also able to cut costs is because they cut conditions. And so that is something that the Biden administration did address. Apparently, a senior administration official said on a call with reporters early on Tuesday that the cost implications of the move away from private prisons was not the motivating factor, because the thing is when these private companies end up, incentivizing and lobbying for more prisoners, they end up getting paid more in the, long run. If you're getting paid $150 a prisoner and your prison population increases off of, what we were paying for $200 a prisoner, you might actually create a situation where the $150 a prisoner, but having more prisoners ends up making you more money and costing the government more money than if you just paid the $200 outright and just did a proper, criminal justice system. So that's a factor to take into account, but they're claiming that it's not about that. Honestly, I don't care if it is. Just seeing this policy shift is a benefit and how it's going to affect people in the long run. So the motivating factor, according to the Biden administration, was the fact that private prisons are not only encouraged profiteering off of human lives, but more importantly, it's been shown by the Department of Justice Inspector General's report to be subpar in terms of safety and security for those incarcerated. So Again, whatever reason the Biden administration is doing it, it ends up creating a beneficial situation, and I think we should count that as a win. So, who does this affect? Well, of course, disproportionately people of color. The concept of racial disparities behind bars is not exactly a new one. Study after report after working group has found a version of the same conclusion. The Sentencing Project estimates that 1 in 3 black men will spend time behind bars during their lifetime, compared with 1 in 6 Latino men and 1 in 17 white men. Arrest rates for marijuana possession are 4 times as high for black Americans as for white. Black men spend an average of 20% longer behind bars in federal prisons than their white peers for the same crimes. So between the lobbying and this statistic, you have the overall prison pipeline that is talked about. And that needs its own video, and I will address that as soon as I can. But just accept for the moment that this is a funneling of people of color through this system in a for-profit way that allows for, again, disproportionately people of color through the lobbying of major companies to end up in prisons and being disenfranchised for a number of different reasons. And this is the kind of policy that he's actually speaking against by stopping this particular for-profit model. And that doesn't mean that it's going to fix police. It doesn't mean it's going to fix the systemic racism. It doesn't mean any of that. But it does mean a significant change in, the tangible conditions that are on the ground to create an even worse institutionalized racism. And it is speaking to the specific conditions of people in these prisons. So, I don't have to, going into what those conditions look like, and we'll look at a few specific examples, but if you're cutting costs consistently, and this cannot be emphasized enough, if you're cutting costs consistently in a for-profit model that deals with people, you're going to cut corners and you're going to hurt people in the long run. Whereas in the government institution, there's laws and regulations that can make it easier to maintain a certain standard for people's care. So in terms of when does this all get pushed aside, well, it's actually difficult to find that information for a good number of the facilities. Of the 12 facilities, I was able to find specific information for one of them and a more roundabout information from back in 2016 for the others. So in December of 2014, this one specific facility, the Mashinon Valley Correctional Center, was said to have renewed a federal government contract for 5 years, with 5 one-year options, leaving for a total of 10 years. So if we take that into account that we are now in 2021, that means that after the 5 years put us in 2019, and that the 2 remaining years were a part of the 1-year options. So that means that if they're not going to renew, that facility will close within the next year, or when the next year marker comes up for that facility to close. So that's a great sign. Already one of them is going to be eliminated within the next year, and that means approximately 1,900 prisoners are likely to end up being in a better situation in terms of their conditions. So what I was able to find for other facilities is that the Justice Department in 2016 that would review contracts for the facilities as they came up for renewal said that they will renew within the next 5 years. Unfortunately, within that 5-year span, the Trump administration was in charge, and I don't know and cannot find very easily or readily available information on how many of those facilities renewed. But given that it looks as if most of them would have renewed within 5-year contracts or within a similar type of situation to what the other facility went through. So we are hopeful that within the time of the Biden administration, all of these facilities will shut down. And given that even if a Republican candidate comes into power and overturns this executive order, there is a good chance that they'd have to start these facilities up from scratch, which makes it a lot more difficult, which means it has a longer lasting impact than just the Biden administration. And that's a good thing. That's a net gain, And I think we should look at it as such. So what are the conditions on the ground? Well, for one, when we look at this example, Rivers Correctional Institution, First, I want to point out that most prisoners stay around 2 years in the facility and were either sent there because of parole conditions, violating parole conditions, or drug offenses. These are not, people who are in jail for murder or all these other things. These are people being put in a facility with poor conditions because they took drugs or they violated parole. These are not violent criminals, and again, they're overwhelmingly people of color, and that's for a reason connected to the whole pipeline system. But one of the things I want to point out is as of 2009, there's one on-site physician in this particular prison, no on-site medical service was provided, and the doctor worked fewer than 40 hours a week. Comparably sized facilities, prison facilities from the Bureau of Prisons, so federally run prisons, had at least 2 full-time physicians and weekend on-site medical services. So people are not able to get medical care. Factor that in with the fact that there is another facility, the TaFT Correctional Institution, which was actually shut down during the Trump administration, or threatened to be shut down during the Trump administration, because they couldn't make repairs on their facility. That's how bad things had gotten. And they still remained operational because Congressman Kevin McCarthy, a Republican from Bakersfield, who was spoken against closing the prison, released statements that the Department of Justice had to halt the removal of inmates from the facility, and of course the Trump administration obliged. This facility remains open to this day. So hopefully the Biden administration, if it is not up for contract ending, can push for this to close in the immediate future. But if you look at any of the Google sources on when you can do visiting hours for this place, it is still open to this day. When it needed mandatory repairs well over, a year and change ago? And nothing's been fixed and nothing's been done from what I was able to see in terms of updates. And in these facilities, you've had situations where you've had maggots and mold found in the prisons, where prisoners were eating, quote, crunchy dirt. And I'm sorry, there's no justification for that. There's no way to represent that people should be in this kind of treatment. That isn't even considering the fact that guards are generally more abusive in these prisons. And I didn't want to show that because of the brutality that can often occur with how prisoners are violently assaulted. There's a lot that goes into these federal prisons. And some of it I just think is just kind of gruesome to show. And this is just the surface of it. This is what we're able to get out of reports. This is not what we're seeing on the ground in these prisons across the board. So when Biden goes out and puts out this policy that speaks against the prison system, that is mentioning the effects of the pipeline and is, actually shutting down these prisons within the scope and span of his administration, I think we should consider it a net good. And hopefully it'll inspire legislation over the next 4 years. One can hope. I'm not holding my breath again, but one can hope that it'll inspire legislation that will actually shut down the prison pipeline system by officially removing private prisons from the government across the board, because these type of institutions should not be privately funded at all. They should in fact be publicly funded. And I think that, at the end of the day, even though this doesn't fix systemic racism, doesn't fix all of this, this is going to make a difference for at least 27,000 lives over the next 4 years. With a wave of a pen, he was able to do that. And we should take that victory as what it is. With that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I hope you enjoyed watching.